can celebrate something which is more genuine, more real than anything that goes out in the world around us. This is reality. We are so blessed this year to celebrate 100 years of this edifice. We can feel the presence of St. John who built it, of St. Tikon who consecrated it, of St. Alexis who was here along with St. Alexander of New York. We can feel even the prayers of St. John of Kronstadt, who donated for the building of this cathedral. Of the new martyr, Nicholas, the Passion Bearer. Their presence transcends these 100 years, and they are with us now. And we are blessed to be able to celebrate with joy, and most of all with gratitude to the all-merciful God for His blessings. We celebrate the martyrdom of St. John, who is our saint of Chicago. We are honored with the presence of his descendants, Tatiana and Igor Kachurov, who have come from St. Petersburg, to show that time and sanctity goes on in a new generation, and a generation after that, and yet one that follows. We are blessed to have with us His Beatitude, Metropolitan Theodosius, who will be the main celebrant of tomorrow's liturgy. Also His Eminence, Archbishop Vsevolod of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church in America. His Eminence, Archbishop Nikolai of the Romanian Orthodox Archdiocese, who have come to share in our joy and to show that what takes place here is for all of Orthodoxy and really for all God-fearing people, especially of this greater Chicagoland area, because we celebrate our local saint in his memory. Martyrdom, a concept which is not easily understood in our day and age. And to celebrate a martyrdom, probably even less than that. Yet we know that St. John died as he lived, knowing Christ and making him known, serving, in this case, a moleben for peace, for return of sanity to a land which was very confused and battered by revolution. This vigil tonight, something that he himself served many times within these walls. And how wonderful that the life of the church goes on, that we are able to sing all of those familiar things, familiar psalms and hymns, familiar to him, except now, glorifying God because of him, because of his life, because of his witness, because of his giving all to Christ. It is our privilege, my friends, and it is wonderful to be here, especially for this weekend, which will continue, so that somehow we are able tonight, tomorrow's liturgy, and then Saturday and Sunday through study, through prayer, through fellowship, through sacrament, to understand what it is to be an Orthodox Christian, and the beauty, and the splendor, and the glory, which also belongs to all of us. I also wish to welcome Father Proto-Presbyter Robert Kondratik, the Chancellor of the Orthodox Church in America, who has come to be with us for the entire weekend, who will with us welcome His Beatitude Metropolitan Hermit, who is coming tomorrow. So indeed, we have a cross-section of the church, and everyone is able to praise St. John. Everyone is able to give glory to God for this very holy place. But it's not enough simply to try to soak up the holiness. We have to live holy lives. We must emulate the lives of the saints who walked and who preached and who lived here, so that we might follow their example and be like them. Then we truly honor them by following their example. Once again, my dear friends, it is good to be here. And may God bless you always.
My name is Pat Mangan, George Mangan. I'm an architect in northern Wisconsin. I was invited to come here and talk about church architecture and the architecture of the cathedral. And what I did was to draw a golden thread line from the temple in Jerusalem and the Old Testament, draw a golden thread line from the temple in Jerusalem and the Old Testament experiences of the glory of God through architecture that God chose to use to lead His people, and how that then, when Christ came, and how the church now, with the glory of God present in our midst, used architecture to continue that, and that there is a tradition of Orthodox architecture which is just incredible in its beauty and its splendor and its glorification of God, and that the cathedral here in Chicago is a very important part of that tradition. And so I guess that's about what it was. That the architecture takes and uses space and light and acoustics and all the senses are involved in the experience of it, and that there is a holy tradition in Orthodoxy that has been observed in the cathedral in its design and construction, and that we need to use it as a model for our architecture in America.
Would you be so kind to give some details about the use of the space, the lights, and the acoustics?
Well, I remember the first time I was in the cathedral. It was on a Holy Saturday morning, and the bishop invited. Actually, that was the second time, but the acoustics are just incredible. The first time I was there when Archbishop John was here, and I remember after the liturgy, the priests in the altar area sang many years Is Polati Despota, and the people responded, and then the priests in the altar area responded and got louder, and the people in the church responded and got louder, and pretty soon the whole church was just resounding with an acoustical experience. Just who can describe it? You have to be there. And then I remember, while I was impressed with that, then Archbishop Boris, one Holy Saturday morning, went around and picked out people from that were sitting there waiting for the service to start to do the readings, the 15 Old Testament prophecies. And so I was invited to do one of them when I got there, and I started to chant. It was just incredible. It was like the ceiling had fallen on my head. When I started to chant, the sound went up, and it came back down. I've talked to Father Hillary, who served here, and about how the details, like even the ventilation. He says when he opens up the window in the cupola, that the breeze can come in, so that there, just lots of features in the cathedral. It's a very simple building, actually. If you look at the plan, it's just a square with an octagon superimposed on it, and the dome. It's the basic Russian church that was brought to Russia by the Greek church 1,000 years ago, and it hasn't changed. And if you go back, one example was the house at Capernaum, which has almost exactly the same architecture as a cathedral. So acoustics, light, the way light comes into the building, these are some of the things that we talked about. But mainly the idea that there's a holiness and a glorification of God that's involved in this, and it's part of the Orthodox tradition.
So what is the essence, in your opinion, the essence of architecture and orthodoxy? How would you link them in a few words?
It's the glorification of God. In the Old Testament, in the tabernacle, when it had been done according to God's plan, God's glory filled the tabernacle. He was a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night was there. So he led his people with the architecture. In the temple, the same thing. After Solomon had completed the temple, and it was during the dedication. After the dedication, God's glory filled the temple. That's the scriptural witness. And then when in the evolution of architecture from the time of Christ, which I think this house at Capernaum is a major link with. Anyway, by the 5th century, when Hagia Sophia was built, the glory of God was in His creation. It was just an incredible experience, and so I think that the experience of the glory of God is probably the key to understanding Orthodox architecture. And what we do is we got to keep our balance, that we don't do things which mar the experience of God's glory. That's the only purpose for it. I made the point that God is the one who tells us how He wants to be worshipped. It's certainly not man's place to come up with those ideas. Our role is to respond to what God has told us to do, to be obedient.
Tatiana says that there was an article written by a journalist shortly after St. John's death. The journalist came and interviewed his wife and family shortly after that, and so this is the source of some of the information about his death, where he said that he just came back from church with the prospera in his hand when he was arrested.
Ему предложили пройти с ними. Он оделся, вышел, за ним увязался сын Саши.
And he was invited to go out. The Bolshevik guards asked him to please go out. He got dressed, and his youngest son, Sasha, accompanied him. Opposition, but to pray for moderation and peace, and that, as was said, that he felt that the people who had left us were brothers, and those who were coming, meaning the Bolsheviks, they also thought would be brothers.
Кто-то из большевиков крикнул: «Ну и ты иди!» Сердце захолонуло, говорит Саша, отпустил. И в спину раздались выстрелы.
And it was then that the Bolsheviks told the son to leave, and the son shortly thereafter heard the shots of the guns.
В 22 году, уже будучи студентом военно-медицинской академии, когда было очень трудно поступить, его сняли с продовольственного довольствия. В те годы это считалась голодной смертью.
He was in the military medical school in 1922, 22 году, and he was taken off of the rationing. His ration card was confiscated, so it meant the starvation.
Он покончил с собой.
And he tragically committed suicide. So
Вот это маленький эпизод, что
a little, just another sad testimony of what horrible times these people have to live through.
Tatyana Igorovna is the great-granddaughter of St. John Kochurov. She feels the power of good in her heart that is expressed by the love of people here.
Но у меня есть сын, который является праправнуком отцу Иоанну.
Her son Igor, who would be the great-great-grandson of St. John, is a seminarian, and it is her hope that God wills that he may be called to serve the church. And this would be a truly wonderful, almost miraculous way in which this link with St. John will be bearing fruit in the present time.
How is God inspiring him in taking closer to the church and in taking his family tradition forward?
Я думаю, что да, но не только. Есть еще и личные мотивы, по которым я пошел в духовную семинарию.
Several factors, and so his family connection to his ancestor is only one of the reasons, but he has his own personal sense of vocation, and that's a combination.
Я хотел бы...
If it's to be a priest, he says, is an awesome thought. The church has existed for 2,000 years. There's, it's much greater than any one person can dream of. If it's God's will that that he's called to serve, he would be honored and humbled by it.
Христианство и более это вечно и очень почетно и быть причастным этому.
Well, I spoke on St. John Kochurov, the founder of our church and the first martyr of the Bolshevik yoke. St. John was born in Ryazan in 1871 to Father Alexander and Matushka Anna Kochurova. He studied in theological schools as a boy and then moved to St. Petersburg, where he did his studies at the Theological Academy. He was there from 1891 to 1895, the same years that St. Alexander Hodovitsky were there. Almost immediately after graduating, he left for the United States and was ordained in August of 1895 to the priesthood by Bishop Nicholas, who was then the ruling bishop in America. He served in Chicago for about 12 years. He was responsible for what at that point was St. Vladimir's parish, a multi-ethnic parish here in Chicago, and he was also responsible for Three Hierarchs Church down in Streator. One of the most outstanding characteristics of his mission work was reconciling uniates back into the Orthodox Church, which he had great success in, and also education work. Both of the churches under his direction had church schools. He also did a lot of work at the level of the diocese, being involved in publishing, developing materials, translating materials, and also in the mutual aid societies for providing help to people who had come to America. He left Chicago and the United States in 1907, returned to Russia and was in Narva on the Estonian border for about 10 years, and there he was primarily a teacher. He was attached to Transfiguration Church there, but his main ministry work, shall we say, was that of teacher. He taught in a boys' school and a girls' school. He taught religion, logic, psychology. And then in 1916 he was transferred to Tsarskoye Selo. In October of 1917, the Bolsheviks, the day before his martyrdom, began to shell the city of Tsarskoye Selo, and he and his fellow priests conducted a procession of the cross and Moleben around town, simply praying for peace. The witnesses, the first-hand accounts we have of that day show that he was only praying for peace. But the next day, when the Bolsheviks took over the town, they arrested him and accused him of praying for the victory of the Cossacks, which would be in support of the provisional government, which the Bolsheviks had just overthrown. They arrested St. John, they took him to the end of town and killed him at that point, despite St. John's attempts to clarify the situation and explain what had really happened. St. John was buried in St. Catherine's Cathedral, where he served. The cathedral no longer exists. It was blown up in 1939. St. John himself was glorified in 1994 in Dormition Cathedral in Moscow. And veneration, of course, continues to this day, both in Chicago and Tsarskoye Selo and other places around Russia and the United States. As I said at the beginning of my presentation, when I was invited to do this, I said I'm going to need a lot of help because I didn't really even know where to turn. Father John, the dean of our cathedral, provided me a lot of information. Father Joshua Frigerio, who is at Ascension Church in Michigan, had done quite a bit of research on St. John and provided me his own materials as well. Mr. Alex Librovsky in Syosset sent me some leads on materials that I ordered through Interlibrary Loan. Boy, there are so many people, even from Russia. Father Anatoly Frolov sent some information, and so basically I just took what people had given me and wove it into this presentation. To my sadness, I didn't really have access to many primary materials, in other words, the works by St. John himself. There are articles that he's written that were part of the Russian American Orthodox Messenger publication. Those are on microfilm at certain libraries, but we found that these libraries are very unwilling to part with their microfilm, so I was not able to look at those, but hope to in the future. In addition, there are letters of his in the Chicago area kept by various people, and actually just today I figured out exactly where they are located, and so hope to look at them as well. But for this presentation I relied mostly on secondary sources.
And what is the essence? Like you marvel at what when you had to go through this work? What did seem so special to you?
That's a very good question. I think it's, if I had to sum it up, it would be work. I mean, St. John was so faithful in the work that he did, and he worked extremely hard. When I put myself in his shoes, I don't understand how someone who didn't really speak English that well could come to a country and serve not only in the context of an English-speaking country, but serve people who spoke Russian, who spoke Serbian, who spoke Arabic, who spoke Galician. He had to be multilingual, and I can only imagine, having lived in another culture where a different language is spoken, what kind of stress he must have felt, and yet he was very faithful to the task. When you add to that the fact that there was very little material support for him and his family, just the amount of faith that he had to have had and the faithfulness with which he performed these apparently very difficult duties is overwhelming to me.
So how would you define, in a few words, the connection with God through you, not only through what he actually did?
Okay, that's a much harder question. I think there's a part from our services that says something like, God rests in his saints. And so to the extent that I might contribute a little bit to the glorification of St. John, I think that, I hope, by God's good grace, that also contributes to the glorification of God. St. John clearly is the image and likeness of God, and so to the extent that we meditate on him, we see God's love for us and God's care for us.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Most blessed Master, bless.
Christ our God, who with the 5 loaves of bread did feed the 5,000 in the wilderness, so likewise also bless the food and drink of thy servants. For holy art thou, always, now, and ever, and unto the ages of ages.
Amen. Peaceful